welcome. I am Kekeli Pognon from the Quaker Council for European Affairs, an organization that has for the past 40 years worked to bring a vision based on the Quaker commitment to peace, justice, and equality to Europe and its institutions. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this event on the Global Compact on Refugees and the role of faith-based organization in refugee protection. This event is the result of a year of collaboration between organizations of various faiths and denominations, keen to explore how the Global Compact on Refugees, this new global refugee protection framework, can be implemented effectively in Europe, and how can we ensure together that refugees' needs are met. Before we proceed, and I think I see some people already using the chat function, I want to tell you that the event will be recorded, but only the speakers will be seen on screen. The chat will be monitored by colleagues, so feel free to introduce yourself, your organization, where you are based, and as the event progresses, you can ask questions because the chat will be monitored by, as I mentioned, colleagues, but also feel free to answer each other's questions. The joys of technology also mean that we will be starting the event with a recorded opening from Margaritis Skinner, Vice President of the European Commission, who among his portfolio are both dialogue with churches and religious associations or communities, but also migration. So without further ado, we will start with the recording of Vice President Margaritis Skinner.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, it is a great pleasure to join you today to discuss the Global Compact on Refugees and the role of faith-based organizations in refugee protection. Let me first congratulate you for organizing today's event, which will be a key contribution to the International Conference of March 2022, Welcoming the Stranger, Shaping the Future. Your initiative highlights the efforts of faith actors who contribute to a coordinated, effective, and impactful international refugee response. The Global Compact on Refugees was adopted at the United Nations General Assembly back in December 2018. It calls for multi-stakeholder partnerships between government authorities, private sector, civil society, humanitarian aid agencies, and local actors to address the complex nature of forced displacement and the need to provide comprehensive and integrated solutions for the dignity and well-being of refugees. The Compact makes specific reference to the important role faith-based organizations play, such as resettlement and integration services, faith-sensitive psychosocial support, and advocacy against xenophobia, just to mention a few actions. The Global Compact represents a landmark achievement. It creates an international cooperative framework based on shared responsibility and solidarity, placing refugee response firmly on the UN agenda. The European Union is actively supporting the development of the Global Compact on Refugees and is pushing for inclusive and comprehensive responses to refugee crisis. As a leading humanitarian and development donor, the EU works with different partners, including civil society and faith-based organizations, as core partners. Migration is a major test to our conception of the European way of life. We must respect our values and commitments to protecting refugees and showing solidarity while developing instruments for controlling migration. It is not enough to say that we welcome refugees. We must also say how we welcome them. We must take a human and humane approach to this issue. There are certain values which must be upheld. saving lives at sea is not optional. Granting asylum to those facing persecution, and ensuring solidarity among us so that those countries who fulfill their legal and moral duties or are more exposed than others can rely on the solidarity of our whole European Union. In this respect, the role of churches and faith-based organizations is essential, remarkable, and commendable. The new Pact on Migration and Asylum that we proposed on the 23rd of September last year and is now being discussed by our member states and the European Parliament proposes strengthened partnerships with third countries, introduces a reliable migration management system, aims at establishing more effective asylum procedures and return procedures, and affirms the Commission's commitment to provide legal pathways to protection in the European Union. With our new proposal, we make specific commitments to ensure the protection of people in need, including the most vulnerable. The first step will be the adoption of the 2016 proposals amending the Reception Conditions Directive, the Resettlement Framework Regulation, and the Qualification Regulation. In the new Pact, we also ensure that the best interest of child migrants are prioritized in the context of asylum, return, and border procedures. This was made a reality through the relocation so far of 2,311 unaccompanied children, families, vulnerable asylum seekers, and recognized refugees from Greece to other EU member states with the active support of the European Commission. The new Pact also calls for a stronger role for civil society and local communities, both in the reception and integration aspects of newcomers. We will promote community sponsorship to this effect and count on your continued support. Dear friends, let me also emphasize that in order to have a credible European asylum system, we must also make sure that those who do not have the right to stay are returned swiftly and with all guarantees in place. EU legislation provides legal safeguards to all returnees and ensures that returns happen only after a thorough and individual assessment of each case. This assessment includes the respect of the principle of non-refoulement, and the return decision is always subject to judicial review. I know well that some of you are engaged in working with returnees. I also count on our increased cooperation in supporting them in the future to help them reintegrate in their country of origin. You and your organizations embody in your actions some of our most basic values. You are essential partners in our work when it comes to concrete action on the ground, for example, by ensuring accommodation, care, and access to education and healthcare for refugees and asylum seekers. Let me use this opportunity to thank you for your work and express our willingness to continue supporting you.
The health situation meant that we were not able to come together, but also meant that sometimes we found ourselves having different priorities, being required in different places at the same time. So Gillian Trigg, Assistant High Commissioner for Protection, could not be with us, but she felt important to share the message and the perspective of the UNHCR on the topic.
Vice President of the European Union, Margarita Schinas, for your video message and for the continued commitment of the European Union to refugee protection. Thank you also to the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, the Lutheran World Federation, the Quaker Council for European Affairs, and Islamic Relief Worldwide for organising this virtual meeting. May I also recognise the long-standing commitment of faith-based communities to protection of refugees and all those displaced. Some of the organisations present today predate UNHCR and have assisted refugees for more than a century. At UNHCR, we know that effective protection lies within local communities. Faith groups are invariably among the first responders to humanitarian emergencies. They stay and deliver protection where it's most needed, thanks to their strong community roots. Well, the aim of our discussions today is to bring religious and faith communities together with the EU, with UNHCR and civil society, to think about how we can better protect the most vulnerable, including those who are displaced and stateless, in the spirit of the Refugee Compact. We've got some wonderful speakers today: women helping refugees to integrate into their communities, Mexican missionaries building a humanitarian corridor to Italy, Swedish Lutheran nuns providing shelter to the most vulnerable. Well, at UNHCR, we hope to harness the vibrant energy and reach of faith groups as advocates and as protectors, particularly in local communities. Well, as we meet today to consider the long-standing support for refugees given by communities of faith, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the history of the Refugee Convention from 1951. For this year, we celebrate the 70th anniversary of this groundbreaking commitment to refugee protection. And I say groundbreaking because 6 years after the end of the Second World War, nations came together to find a solution for about 2 million people who continued to be displaced in the aftermath of war. They agreed on two principles. Everyone has a right to seek asylum from violence and persecution, and an absolute prohibition is imposed on the return of an asylum seeker and refugee to a place of danger. These principles have been honoured by the international community, but today we face a vastly different challenge. A year ago, the UN Refugee Agency reported nearly 80 million refugees and those forcibly displaced, along with another 10 million or so of stateless people in need of international protection. The number's unprecedented, and it continues to rise over the last 20 years. About 1% of humanity lives in some form of exile from intercommunal, racial and religious violence, armed conflict, poverty, inequality, persecution, environmental degradation and natural disasters. Perhaps particularly shocking is that 52% of refugees are children. 85% of those in need of protection are actually hosted by the generosity of poor and developing countries in the global south. We're severely challenged today by multiple, protracted and new humanitarian and refugee crises. The Rohingyas fleeing to Bangladesh, millions leaving Venezuela, living with host countries in the region, many more millions displaced by communal violence in the Sahel and Lake Chad regions of Africa, continuing crises in Yemen and Afghanistan, and unstable political environments in Rwanda, Burundi, and the Western Balkans, and of course recent conflict in Ethiopia, the Central African Republic, and Mozambique. So in this interconnected world, we understand that unilateral actions are no longer enough to find solutions to these mass movements of people. And there's a growing understanding that we need to move from ad hoc emergencies to sustainable prevention. We need, in short, refreshed thinking and some new ideas. And so it was in 2018. 148 nations agreed to the Global Compact on Refugees, committing to joined-up global action, not only by sovereign states, but by civil society, the business community, local mayors and municipalities, parliamentarians, philanthropists, academics, and of course religious and faith-based groups. In the Compact, the group agreed on the principle of solidarity. Nations would share equitably the responsibility to protect refugees and those forcibly displaced. The generosity of host countries would in future be supported by wealthier countries and by funding, diplomatic advocacy, technical support, and by the engagement of the international financial institutions to invest in international development. Well, these weren't just words on a page. They were given concrete meaning just a year ago here in Geneva, when 3,000 people came to represent all of these stakeholders I've mentioned, with 1,400 pledges to give real-life, concrete effect to the vision of responsibility sharing. But a few weeks later, the spirit of optimism of the Compact was profoundly tested by the COVID-19 pandemic, and this year has been dominated by the impact of that pandemic on the countless millions of vulnerable people, many of whom are refugees and asylum seekers. My message today is that the pandemic has demonstrated the enduring value of the Refugee Compact, for no one can be truly safe till everyone is safe. It has shown us that, in a way that almost no other crisis could have done, how important it is to include refugees and the displaced in education, in access to employment, and social services, and of course today, inclusion in vaccine programs. Well, the faith-based groups have made unique contributions to burden and responsibility sharing. The Compact recognises the role of faith groups, and they have played a prominent role in reaching out to local communities during this COVID crisis, speeding up relief actions and providing guidance. UNHCR is grateful for the 45 pledges made by faith-based groups on poverty alleviation and strengthening the capacity of local faith communities to ensure child protection and support gender-based violence. We've also been pleased to see what a strong leader the EU has been in the spirit of global solidarity. They have provided €8 billion between 2016 and 19, supporting governments, international organisations and civil society, including faith-based groups. The EU was a very high-level presence at the 2019 Refugee Forum and made a commitment in its policy through Lives in Dignity and with budgetary commitments. European actors have submitted over 350 pledges on solutions, statelessness, developing asylum and protection capacities and education. I've been talking, of course, about the Compact and pledges, but I'd now like to mention the next steps. We're working with our partners on the high-level officials meeting to be held in December this year in Geneva, we hope in person. It will be an opportunity to review what's been achieved so far, and of course our stakeholders, and most particularly the refugees and displaced people, hold us to account. Have we been effective, or has the process been effective in supporting host countries, in developing self-assurance and reliance of refugees, finding durable solutions, and being on a pathway to statelessness? We hope that we'll continue to work with faith-based communities to prepare for the next Global Refugee Forum in 2022, and UNHCR is working with Religions for Peace to look at root causes of displacement. Our High Commissioner has supported the decision last year to establish a multi-religious council of leaders. And we also look forward to the summit, Welcoming the Stranger and Shaping the Future, to be held by religious leaders and faith groups also in 2022. That summit will give a voice to refugees themselves, along with all the other actors and faith actors, on concrete and genuinely collaborative action as a stepping stone towards the Refugee Forum to be held later that year. So let me end on a very encouraging note. The UN Secretary General has recently been awarded the Zayed Award for Human Fraternity, an award made in the spirit of the work of His Holiness Pope Francis and His Eminence the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayeb, to advance interfaith dialogue and to promote our common humanity. And it's in this spirit that the Secretary General has donated that prize, $500,000, to UNHCR to protect the most vulnerable and the forcibly displaced. So thank you all. I very much look forward to hearing the outcome of this meeting and look forward to working with all of you as we move towards the next stage in refugee protection through the Global Refugee Forum. Thank you all very much.
After hearing from institutions and their express commitment to the GCR, it felt even important to start the more substantive part of the discussion by grounding it in the lived experience and the expertise of those who have had to navigate the European asylum system, and also those who assist them in their search for protection and sanctuary. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to the moderator of the first panel, Anila Noor. Anila is the founding director of New Women Connectors and a member of the newly established European Commission expert group on the abuse of migrants in the field of migration, asylum, and integration. Anila is also a refugee activist and a researcher based in the Netherlands, and her work focuses on the issue of refugee representation gap in EU member states and EU institutions. So this panel will take us through the internal dimension of the implementation of the Global Compact on Refugees. And the second panel will look at the external dimension. And the key word in both cases is finding how can we partner, how can we work together so that ultimately asylum and protections policies are implemented in a way that ensure the dignity and the safety of refugees. So Anila, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kekali, for introducing me, and thank you everyone for joining. I already see we have more than 200 participants, so thank you so much for joining us from all around the globe. So we have starting this event by listening to two recorded message, and this event of this panel, we will like to have more interactive and live discussion from our panelists today. So I'm so happy to moderate this session. It's my privilege to be involved on the table and be part of this discussion. And I myself, as a refugee and living in Europe, we would like to understand how Global Compact of Refugee and new Pact of Migration are actually working on the local realities of people. So we have very amazing panelists. I will ask them to do their own introduction and on their intervention they are doing in their local reality. So we have amazing speakers who will talk about how they are trying to contribute towards global compact of refugees, and how they are trying to share responsibility and solidarity to create more inclusive approach to give a meaningful participation of refugees and resettlement. So we have our first speaker, Father Ray, who is joining us from Italy, and he is working with Mexican missionary in Italy. And our second panelist, she's Sister Karin, who will join us from Sweden. She's working with Swedish Lutheran non-sheltering refugees at Alasika Cloister since 1983. And then and last, we have a good and amazing panelist, Naira Kadik, who is joining us from Croatia, and she's CEO, and she's working for the Center for Culture Dialogue that building intercultural society in Croatia. So I will start and turn on to Father Ray. Thank you so much, Father, for joining us, and I would like to hear from you what you are doing in Italy and how you are involving through the work of Caritas in Italy.
Well, thank you. Thank you for question invitation. I think, well, for us, I represent the Caritas Italy, who is enrolled in Caritas Vicenza specifically. My job is the collaborating Caritas Vicenza, where we had some refugees, thanks to the sponsorship program taken by the Italian Conference of Bishops here in Italy. So practically we are host refugees in our program, but we had a very interesting program because before the refugees came to our parish or to our places, we had to make a not big collaboration with the parishioners. Usually, thanks to the bishop here, since 2015, we had an appeal to all parishes and faith communities to collaborate with refugees or to host refugees. In this case, we make a model, an important model in Caritas Vicenza. That is, we had a group of people that we work here in the office for refugees, that we trying to first to make the appeal and to talk with different places, whether in the community, whether in the parish, whether in some other conference, to make an awareness to the refugees and ask also for the help to host people here in Italy. So our program starts when we go to a parish. When we make this appeal, we try to get volunteers who are willing to do this job for 1 or 2 years, and then we start doing a program for them. We have 3 different appointments. When we talk about the migration, we talk about refugees, we talk about the history for the people who will come to the Paris specifically to live there, and as well to the awareness to the whole community, to the society. So in these preparations, we had volunteers. Sometimes we had a group of 50 volunteers, and more or less we start in the final group about 20 people, from 15, 20, 30 people, depends on the parish or depends on the town where we are doing this. And then the refugees comes, usually we had apartment or a place where the families would live, and then start the whole movement for the, I would say it like that, for helping them. So it means that is we are in a triangle of we collaborators who are from Caritas, Vicenza, volunteers who have the main role because they are the ones who will uh, welcome the refugees to their own places, and the refugees who will accept this invitation or who will live with us for 1 or 2 years. No? And then the important thing is that volunteers are the one who have the specific tasks. For example, the job for accounting, the job of housekeeping, the job of going to knowing the community, etc., etc. So the people have their roles, and the refugees as well trying to get involved in this area. The important thing for us is more than the refugees who will come to our parishes or to the town, is that the society would be aware that there are people who are in need. There are people who can be even integrated in the society. So for us, the main job will be the awareness for the society, and even something that I would like to say is that this faith-based community is not for us. It's the organization, the Catholic organization, but the volunteers could be from any religion, any faith organization, or even people who are willing to work with the group or with the Caritas. The important thing for us is that the people could be or could feel at home when they are with us.
Thank you, Father Ray. Thank you so much for sharing your insight about how you are working in Italy and how you are trying make sure through your volunteer, like refugees and asylum seekers who are coming to Italy, they feel at home. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. I would like to request to now Naira. She's here. I'm just trying to see, and I would like to ask her. Sister Karen. I would like to ask you if you can share your insight, how you are doing and working in Swedish in the resettlement. You are trying to run the shelter in Sweden. So I'm just seeing. Yes, you are here. So please, floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me to this very interesting session, and I will tell a little bit about our small house. We are a small community in a convent, small convent in Sweden. We are at the moment two sisters, one novice and one postulant, and it's quite a new convent because Sister Marianne was our foundress, and she was professed in 54, and then she was the first nun in the Church of Sweden since the Reformation. So when the sisters started together, they were living with open doors, and then in 78, the Quaker asked if he could take a refugee family. That's how it all started, and since then we have been living with refugees. From the beginning, it was just more or less that we were giving shelter to them, and the Quakers were working with their asylum procedures. But then in 81, we were raided by the police, and some of the refugees were sent back to their countries of origin. But their lawyers continued to work within the European court, and they won in the European court, so the refugees came back to Sweden. But at that time, we were called a suspicious place, so to call. And that time, we couldn't have any refugees in sanctuary with us. We had refugees within the asylum procedure or staying here after permission. But at that time, we started to travel to the refugee camps all over Sweden, and we learned a lot about the asylum system and the refugee law. And since then, I have been studying the refugee law, I must say. That's something I'd learned since when I came to the convent. It's the refugee law. And after that, we have had Family 86. This was stopped. And since then, we have all families, and we have provided sanctuary for many refugees. Very often, they are just coming and standing on our doorstep and have nowhere to go. Sometimes we have been 20 in the house, but when we were 65 in our house. And cooperating during the years with very good lawyers, but also with the UNHCR and Amnesty International. Thousands of refugees has passed through our house to get a new start in Sweden. So far, we have succeeded with all cases except one. And so I think in that way, we have tried to find solutions for everyone. And that's how we have been working. And of course, mostly with families, but also with single people. And we have had all religions in our house. We have all different churches, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, non-believers, I think more or less everything. And we have learned a lot during the years. First of all, that we are all humans. And with the same needs and with the same, what should I say, same needs and same need of freedom, so-called freedom, but also love. It's not only a question about giving people status to stay in Sweden, but you must also have time to feel that you are wanted. And we have seen that because we call our refugees not refugees, we call them our guests. And we are living and sharing everything with our guests, the food, the shelter, the dishes, everything, the bathrooms, the toilets. We are sharing everything with them. And I think that what we have experienced from that is that we have a lot to learn from the refugees, and they have many things to give us. And this is something, it's a gift for us, I will say.
Thank you, sister. Thank you so much. It's very important message reminding us like we all are humans. In the end, why we are having this discussion, because we want to feel dignity and we want to receive love and even to take and give back the love. Thank you so much for sharing your insight from your context. Now I will request our last panelist to have to share her insight from Croatia. Naira, are you here? Yes, please give a little bit your bio, what you are doing, and how you are involving refugees in Croatia. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anila. Dear organizers, panelists, and guests, thank you for the invitation and opportunity to talk about the topic from the lenses of faith-based organization, that is Center for Cultural Dialogue, and religion institution, that is Islamic Community in Croatia. Center for Cultural Dialogue is actually creating, supporting, and running projects which aim to give refugees and their host communities more support, find long-term solutions, and offer opportunities for refugees to grow and lead economically independent lives. Our activities in integration as a two-way process, which involves all of us, are facing and dealing with challenges such as need for strengthening social inclusion in education, building trust in local communities through dialogue, reshaping the narratives on migration, integration of migrant women, and dealing with pandemic COVID-19. One of our projects is named New Neighbors, and it's how we called actually refugees and migrants. And it's focused at inclusion of people who have been granted international protection into the Croatian society. project is co-funded by the European Commission Fund for Asylum, Migration and Integration and Government of Republic of Croatia. We work in 3 dimensions. First one is providing help to the people who have been granted international protection through direct work and interactions with them. Focus is on individual approach, development and implementation of individual integration plans. Second dimension of our work is sensitization of the local community and Croatian society to new neighbors through different activities such as sport, art, and cultural activities that gather domestic people and persons who have been granted international protection. In this dimension, we also have training programs for health and educational professionals to address cultural and religious diversity. And also, we work with media representatives and journalists in reshaping the narratives on migration. One important dimension of our work is also monitoring and evaluation. Actually, we are working at the moment on evaluation study that will measure the success of integration and inclusion of persons that have been granted with international protection in Croatia. Thank you. Anila, I'm back to you.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you so much for your quick and very interesting, local realities is really important for us, because here we are trying not only to understand how we are doing our work in our for our community, but how to combine it to use the multi-stakeholder approach, and how we can give our insight as a recommendation towards either is EU new pact of integration and migration, but also the global level of compact of migration and refugee, which is happening, and we need to bring these good practices or to our global discussion as well. So thank you so much for everyone. I would like to now to have a few questions, but I see we have very good questions already. So I will appreciate and encourage all of you to share your question. If you have any specific question for our any panelists, do ask and do share your reflection, even your feedback for this event. I would like to ask my first question to Father Ray, because Father Ray, you talk about how you are trying to involve volunteers a lot with, with their work towards resettlement, integration of refugee. But I would like to also to hear from you if you could explain how you are actually trying to give a platform of refugees, representative, how to be involved in the design or discussion, or you feel there is a gap, there's a lack of representation of refugee, and how you are dealing and working with that.
Well, for us, in our program, specifically Vicenza, we try to do, for example, I say it's a triangle, no? At the same time, because refugees took part of this organization or project as well, we try to, that in 1 year, 2 years, they will be autonomous, or they can do an integration as such. So that's why during the project or during our job as a Caritas is trying to get for them as well the awareness, or in some ways to realize their own dreams of how they could do here in Italy. At the same time, so we include then as well to the opportunities to talk in the different forums, to talk in different areas as well in the society here, not only in the Paris, but even in some other events. And that's why they try as well to realize and to share their own experience. Of course, it's still a gap, because we're still in a country that is very, very harsh for refugees or for migrants, but at the same time, it's a small, I would say, opportunity for them. For example, myself, I am a migrant in Italy. So that's why I say this part of this, the whole program, to trying to open different, offering different, I would say different ways to make the refugees or migrants be a voice in this country, in this society.
Thank you, Father. Indeed, it is a gap, and that's why we are working together to see, not only highlight this gap, but also provide a recommendation how we can fill this gap and connect our all lives and towards Europe and towards global. I would like to go to the Naira, because Naira, in your quick introduction, you talk about you are trying to bring reshaping, approach is very important, and that's why we really need to work and to rethink the work we are doing in the forced migration or resettlement for refugee. And you also mentioned about narratives, why it is important to rechange the narratives and challenge the existing narratives. I would like to know, this is, we are talking about global compact of refugee. I would like to see how much you really feel the connection or feel totally disconnection of global compact of refugee in your local work and you are doing. So the response of global compact of refugees being missing, or do you feel is linked? So if you like to share something about that.
Yeah, thank you, Anil. Actually, at our work at Center for Culture Dialogue and Islamic community in Croatia, we really feel linked to a global compact on refugees, especially linked to the objectives of the compact. For example, local integration is one of the solutions also that is part of the program of action of the Global Compact on Refugees, is the primary objective of our work in this area, in the area of integration. As I mentioned, Project New Neighbors illustrates how the global impact actually on refugees is being put into action and how it's transforming the lives of refugees and Croatian host community by the engagement of faith actors such as Islamic community in Croatia and our organization Center for Culture Dialogue. This project is a result of joint commitment and cooperation between Islamic community in Croatia, Center for Culture Dialogue, and Ministry of Internal Affairs of Republic of Croatia. And that witnesses actually the strong response and strategical approach to integration where everyone plays a part. Joint work of government and Islamic community in integration of refugees is a result of previous long-term cooperation and good relations built between these institutions. Orderly relations are outcome actually of agreement on matters of common interest between Islamic community in Croatia and Croatian government, since Croatia is one of only 4 countries in Europe that has legally and institutionally recognized Islam as an equal religion to others. Also, from my experience in the field, refugees usually gravitate somehow naturally towards the Islamic community in Croatia. So this cooperation actually in this field of integration is like meaningful and really, really natural. Also related to the compact, Center for Cultural Dialogue is investing in local communities and contributing to local integration through direct involvement of local authorities, faith actors, local businesses, and local civil societies in integration processes. Jointly, we implement different public events on local levels that provide a safe space for dialogue between refugees and domestic people. Activities in areas such as sport, art, culture, these activities create opportunities for locals and newcomers to meet, to get to know each other, to interact, to build trust among each other, and accept each other in one atmosphere that is a mutual understanding and atmosphere of dialogue. We also try that our work facilitates a meaningful participation of refugees, especially women, person with disabilities and youth in Croatian society, ensuring the inclusion of their perspectives in this process.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy, personally glad to hear that you are actually giving very importance to not only for meaningful participation of refugee, but also bringing the lens of gender equality and equity when we are dealing with forced migration. I would like to ask my next question. I see already participants are asking so many questions. I will come back to that, but I would like to take the privilege of being myself as a moderator, ask this question to Sister Karin, because it's very important. You said we need to be keep the humanitarian lens, like we are human in your work. So what you are thinking is missing, when you are working for the with a multi-stakeholder, what do you think being a faith-based organization is missing from your own experience, and you really want to make more strengthen with other initiative, especially in the field of global compact and even EU pact. So what do you think is missing and needed?
I think at the moment in Sweden has been quite generous, uh, looked quite to be quite generous, but in the reality, it's not always like that.
Mhm.
And for the moment, Sweden is closing down rapidly. Very, I say we can't take any more refugees at all. And they are just counting and not looking on each case. They are just the decisions are very bad down now at the uh, migration board and the refugee court. So really, you have to work very hard so that each case should be looked at separately and not not just like a number, because now they take a lot of they want to. Now we must make a sign that Sweden is not generous. That's what's happening here in Sweden. So many people just get a negative answer. So that's why it's so important to put every case as a human catastrophe because every refugee is really it's a catastrophe because no one ought to be a refugee. That's why we have to listen to them. And I think we also have to listen to the refugees as that they are the one who having the rights because they have the right to ask for asylum. And sometimes we forget that. We are just looking at them as some sort of people that's a problem, not looking at refugees as a challenge and it's something good for our country. We look at them as problems. If we can't look at them as challenging and possibilities, then we have to see that everybody has something to give. And we have to look at all parts. That's, I think, we are working also to the politicians. And for the moment, I'm quite involved in that, trying to the parliamentarians here in Sweden. I try to work close to them to see, because we are changing our refugee law at the moment. And I think it's important that all of us who has a faith, we have to look at those that we are human beings, and we should never forget that, and we must tell that to our politicians. I think that's the main issue we have, because we are also free in another way. I must say I'm very happy that we are free with not I'm not employed of anyone than by God. It's very low salary, but I think it's very important that we say the truth, because people are not listening to the refugees themselves. We have to be their voices. That's very important, I think.
Thank you. That's our mission, and this is our faith, to bring humanity first and to bring equality first. I already see two very important questions. One is directly for Naira. Is the question the person asking? Does your organization also work with the refugees who are in the process of claiming asylum, in for the granted the protection, like who are asylum seeker? And second question I would like for maybe for everyone is about the impact of COVID, because in this pandemic we can already see so many limitations are happening. We already facing so much challenge, and to even practice, the social distance is become like a privilege for us. So people on the move is so difficult. So I will request from Naira to specific answer that question, and then I will ask my second question for everyone. Yes, Naira, over to you.
Actually, Center for Cultural Dialogue works only with people who already gained international protection in Republic of Croatia. So that's the reason why our main work is focused on integration, working with communities and working directly with people who got international protection. So we help them in administrative procedures, in social, religious, and cultural integration, etc.
Thank you. Okay, so my second question was about the impact, side effects of COVID, how we can make sure, because gender-based violence is a high rate, the protection of borders are getting more high and restrictions. So how you are facing and feel this problem is getting increased in your work. I will start with Father Ray, and then I will request to Sister Karen to give her insight about it. Yes, Father, over to you.
For us, we are lucky at the moment because we don't have any case of COVID at this time, thanks God. But because as well we had a good organization. I think the structure that we already constructed is important for us. For example, Veneto. I live in the region Veneto, where was the first cases of COVID in Italy. But at the same time, for example, of course, the government makes some rules, some lockdown. And the first lockdown, of course, we had some problems with, of course, stress or depression, etc. But the structure of Caritas was very important in the sense that we still have in contact with the refugees. We already had the test. For example, at the moment we had test COVID, this rapid test every 3 weeks, and even refugees, for the first time with the lockdown, we already make the translations to different languages about the rules in the government, about the how they could stay at home or not to go out, for example, or how to do in case they have the symptoms of COVID. No, it was very important. Of course, we had a translator who did this job. And at the moment, for example, we were lucky because people are working. Some of the people or some of the refugees who are still doing some job interviews, and we already have through the health system here, we had the test before they go out or before they go to an interview. So that's important for us. As I said, maybe we are lucky, but maybe I think I emphasize our structure that really want to do a good communication with our host and as well for the volunteers.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to ask the same question to Sister. But you see already the difference or the huge impact, of COVID in terms of your work, and especially how you can prevent the, gender-based violence is like gonna be very high, and this pandemic is having very heavy dark shadow for females from refugee background. So how you have you witnessed anything, or how you are responding to it?
We have directly contact with our area for those who are in the infection, working with this infection in Sweden, here in Uppsala. So we have been in contact with them because we got the disease in one part of our house, but they were not very ill, and they were tested, and we could keep them isolated, and everything went well. But I also know that in the beginning of this COVID here in Sweden, there was a lots of cases in the cities where there was lots of refugees, and it was not so they. So that's why this group contacted us from the very beginning. So we should really try to explain for the refugees in our neighborhood, not only those who stay with us, but those we are in connection with, and explain about this. So I think this was a big problem in the beginning, really. Also, for in some cities, the refugees were living close to each other, especially the asylum seekers, if they were not living in camps, if they were living by families. They were staying very narrow and with many people in small flats. That's why lots of cases in the beginning of this pandemic in March and April had high numbers among them. So I think that the country has started really to try to get the information out among the refugees. But the sad thing is that I heard from some rumors from some refugees that they thought that, oh, the pandemic is nothing, it's just something that people say. So there have been some sort of false rumors among the refugees. And I think that is something we have to work with, all of us, to tell them that this is not true.
Thank you. Thank you, sister. Thank you, everyone. We are all already last few moments of our this session, so I will request all of my panelists to share your feedback because last year, not last year, like in 2019, we were in Geneva attending first ever Global Refugee Forum, and I was myself as a refugee among for those very few refugees who were there talking about refugees negotiation and to create more sustainability for the refugee system. So I would like to hear one comment and one recommendation from your end, how we can create more synergies, how we can more uh, partnership, and how we can create with a faith-based organization, with refugee-led organization, with other private sector and states, how we can collaborate more refugee reliance and refugee solution-based approach. So if you would like to share your comment and your recommendation, we would like to hear from you, like one or two recommendation from each. So I will start with Father Ray and then Sister and then Naira, so we can wrap up.
For me, well, as a faith, a man or as a priest, I will say that apart from, of course, from the international law, one of the main things is to see refugees as a human person, and for us is to that they have their own dignity, they have their own way of living, and it's not like I said, sister says it's not it's like a menace, but it's a kind of joy that to have a diversity in the society.
Yes.
Of course, for me, just a short comment or observation in the Italian law is that when the people, the hosts who came through the humanitarian corridor, is that they already recognize as a refugees in their own in the country where they are. When they came to Italy, is as well to recognize as a refugee immediately, not to go through the commission, no, for refugees. And sometimes depends on the regions because Italy is very interesting country, but at the same time is to say, okay, if there is already recognized a person as a refugee in Africa, of course, when it comes in Italy, it's already a refugee. It doesn't need to go to another commission to be recognized in the Italian government or the Italian state.
Sister?
I think we have a big challenge, and that is to tell that all we are all human beings. To continue to say that everybody is a human being and with the same rights, and also we have to tell the truth. Those who see from the part of the refugees, we must be very aware of telling the truth about what's really happening and how the future look like. And also, I think it's very important, as I said before, to see that all refugees is also a gift. And integration is not from one part; it's also from two parts. It's not only that the refugees should change; we should also change to open our minds to see that this is something good for all of us.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. It's very important message. Like we really need to open up ourselves. So, Naira, last verse to you.
Yeah, I would just want to align that when we talk about integration and migrants, it's really important to tackle all the dimension of integration. So we have political, we have a legal dimension, we have social dimension, we have economical dimension, but we also have a cultural and religion dimension. It's really important that all stakeholders are included in the process of integration. It's not only that the refugees are the job of Ministry of Internal Affairs or the NGOs that are working directly with refugees. I think that we need to have more stronger partnerships between all these stakeholders. And also, I think that the role of faith actors should be more recognized. As for example, I saw that the Commission's action plan on integration and inclusion from 2021 to 2027 notice the key role that church and religious communities play in achieving a truly effective and comprehensive integration policy. That's, for example, a good thing. We should be more present in these action plans and strategies.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone, for all my panelists for having this discussion more interactive and more interesting. It's really important that when we are listening and talking with refugee, we really need not only to understand, but also to provide them meaningful participation in the debate, and that to create more inclusive societies. So by saying this, I would like to invite and hand over to my very good and close colleague, Shaza Al-Rehavi, who will be the moderator for the second session. And Shaza, she's from Syria, but now she's living as a refugee herself in Germany. And I know her from last few years. It's my luck. I'm fortunate to know her. So I would like to invite her and to say to take the handover from me and take the discussion. Thank you everyone for listening to me, and hope we stay in touch.
Thank you, Anila, for the introduction, and thanks for the session. And hello, everyone. I would like to welcome everyone. Good evening, good morning if you are from the other side of the world. And hello. Actually, it is my honor and my privilege to be as a moderator for this amazing session. And after the first session, where we heard a lot about the work that the faith-based organization are doing, we are going to discuss more in depth the external dimension, as we said, and see how the institutions, states, and civil society and faith-based organization are working, and what is the challenges and where is the opportunities, and how we can improve the work regarding to the having better life for forced migrants and refugees and so on. To do so, actually, we are trying to having amazing panelists. It's a mixed from all the stakeholders, and we have the foreign minister, foreign office of Germany, Mr. Pet Kuhle, and the head of the division of the moment. Sorry. The head of the division of the multi-stakeholder policy of humanitarian assistance from the Federal Foreign Office of Germany. Welcome, Mr. Pitt. We also have the Francisco Lucini, the head of Unit Migration and Forced Displacement, Director General of International Partnership. Hello, Mr. Lucini. And then we will have two faith-based organizations. We will start with Mr. Atallah Fitzgibbon, Faith and Partnership Advisor of Islamic Relief Worldwide. And last but not least, we have Mrs. Maria Imonen, the Director, Department of World Service, the Lutheran World Federation. I'm really so happy that we have also the gender, at least gender balance. So we are having a female in this panel as well. So thanks for the panelists, and we will start with Mr. Pitt. As we all know, that states and the other stakeholders and the actors made more than 1,400 pledges during the GRF, and they all committed to particularly support refugee self-resilience in the host countries. As we all know, that Germany, as a co-convener of the GRF, was one of the most supportive countries, and they did a lot in this regards. So what my question is, as a state, where is Germany regarding the commitment made at a GRF, and what is your priorities are for the further follow-up process?
No, thank you very much, Shaza, for the very warm welcoming words and for the introduction, and also a very warm welcome from my side to the participants.
Thanks.
Should I try to answer, come back to the first question? You know, Germany as a co-convener in the Global Refugee Forum had a special role, and we think that the forum was a true milestone. What we particularly appreciate is the quantity and the diversity of the pledges towards the achievement of the goals of the Global Compact, which range from financial support to resettlement quotas to numerous group pledges. And we think that it's the huge diversity of actors making the pledges truly reflects the whole of society approach that the Compact has. The large contributions made by the private sector are particularly important and particularly promising from our point of view. Germany, as a co-convener of the forum, remains fully committed to further supporting the implementation process, naturally. We also remain active in our role in the co-sponsoring group on education, a role that we have taken very serious. And we are particularly focusing on access to higher education for refugees. But you will probably be most interested in what have we done concretely in terms of our pledges. As you might know, Germany submitted 13 pledges in support of all 4 goals of the Compact, and they came from different parts of the German government, reflecting our whole of government approach to refugee protection. We have been also reporting regularly on the process, on the implementation. And what we pledged at the forum was an initial 100 million euro for funding for UNHCR in 2020, and also substantial development-oriented funding in displacement contexts. And by the end of 2020, we stand at more than 365 million euros that we had provided for the humanitarian part of the UNHCR's operation worldwide, and which also include the dedicated funding for the COVID-19 appeal of the UNHCR and its response plan. What we also have done is we front-loaded our core contribution to UNHCR as an important measure last year. And we were also able to maintain our substantial development-based funding levels. Germany also stands by its pledge to support sustainable energy and wash infrastructure. We particularly commend the setup and subsequent process of the Energy Challenge Working Group. We have a joint project with the Global Plan of Action, UNDP, UNHCR in Djibouti as an example, and this one is moving forward. This means very concretely that with this initiative, Djibouti is becoming the first country where all power in UNHCR operated settlements is generated by solar energy. And as another concrete example, as we have announced at the forum, we became a member of the core group of the support platform for the solution strategy for Afghan refugees, something that we take very serious. And together with numerous partners, we are fostering comprehensive approaches in the Afghan refugee situation. What we also did last year, when we were the presidency of the European Union's Council, we tried to use this role in order to advance the Compact's implementation. So we commemorated the first anniversary of the forum in the last session of the respective council working group that deals with humanitarian assistance. And we also provided UNHCR with an opportunity to address the EU member states in this regard. And in our point of view, it will be important to use the positive momentum to advance new partnerships formed and to follow up on the commitments that have been made. We think that the high-level officials meeting in December will be an important opportunity in this regard and to demonstrate concrete progress made on GCR indicators, identify concrete action points in preparation of the next forum, and agree on a common strategy to move forward. And lastly, as you know, in 2021, this year does not only mark halfway through the next global forum, but also this is the year of the 70th anniversary of the Geneva Refugee Convention. And we are clearly determined to seize the opportunity and the momentum of this important date for refugee protection worldwide and to mobilize engagement for the high-level officials meeting. I would leave it with this and hand it over back to you, Shasa. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bitt, and thanks for these examples and good practices. I will come back to you for the other round of the questions. Mr. Lozzini, for again, as an EU institution, What are the challenges and the barriers with the partnership with a faith-based organization in the administration and aid for refugees? And how can these challenges be overcome? Floor is yours.
Many thanks, first of all, for this invitation. So my name is Francesco Luciani, and I am the head of the Migration and Post-Displacement Unit in the Directorate General for International Partnerships of the European Commission. Very happy to be with you today. And reply to your question, I mean, I can say that, if your question is what are the challenges and barriers, I think, first of all, there are no big challenges or barriers. The European Union works and is very happy to work with civil society organizations, and the faith-based organizations are part of the civil society. And this is part and typical expression of our engagement, working with civil society organizations. And this is also very much recommended by the Global Compact on Refugees, which is our overarching, let's say, policy document. We know that working with civil society organization, including a faith-based organization, is the best way also to achieve results at grassroots level, and to have also the capacity to be very effective, to reach all those that are waiting for assistance and international protection, as we are speaking also about refugees in particular. And the EU intends to continue also to work in that manner, also under the new multi-annual financial framework that is starting this year, will continue for 7 years. So we have already a strong tradition of work with civil society organization, and we will continue to use it. We have also dialogue more horizontal levels. If then, I mean, we want to just to identify challenges, indeed. Well, I mean, of course, I mean, challenges don't exist necessarily, but it's important to be reminded that in any case, whenever the European works to in line with a certain number of principles and values and rules. So of course, I mean, we are not neutral about principles and values. We follow the Charter of the EU, and I mean, I can say, I need to stress that, of course, we first of all, we work with those that are in favor of advancing the EU goals of sustainable development, human rights, gender equality, and peace building. We wanted to work in a way that reflects the diversity of the actors on the ground, so as all local dynamics can be captured. There must be mutual respect of the values and world views, and there must be, let's say, we must have a shared responsibility in addressing extremism, avoiding any form of discrimination, of hate, violence, etc. And also, I mean, we work for having nobody left behind. So indeed, also the aid and assistance that the organization working with us must show is an inclusive form of system and cooperation. I mean, when all these principles are respected, I mean, we are really happy to work with any organization that can bring another value.
Thanks, Mr. Luciani. Now let me invite Mr. Atallah. As now the faith-based organization point of view, what the challenges or what these opportunities that might be either challenges that prevent you to practice or to engage in the humanitarian system, or even if there is any possibilities, any chances, so it's improve your work to be more engaged in the humanitarian system. So floor is yours.
Thank you, Shaza. Yeah, well, first on the barriers, we've done a lot of analysis around this at the Joint Learning Initiative and at Islamic Relief. Islamic Relief is obviously a long-standing member of the humanitarian community. We've been a major partner with UNHCR for many years. But we recognize that where refugees are concerned, it's often the local faith communities, the churches, the mosques, the temples, etc., which are the first responders. They are the people who provide protection and go on to provide more important services of integration and acceptance, etc. And it's them that there are considerable barriers to their engagement with the humanitarian community. And part of that is our problem as humanitarians. You know, we've spent 30 years building up this very complex system of policies and procedures and processes, which are well-intentioned. Ethics, for instance, we have quite complex and excellent systems of ethics and structures like clusters and all of these things. So it's a whole paraphernalia of systems which are not very accessible to people who don't speak that language, who don't understand that terminology. And therefore, we find with local faith communities, we're often speaking different languages of meaning. You know, we say protection, they think of something else. You know, so there needs to be an enormous amount of discourse and dialogue around values and ways of doing things. But every time we have a crisis in child protection or others, you know, we create extra systems to protect ourselves, but that also excludes. So that's one of the major barriers to ways in which we can partner with local communities. And then the very real concerns, I think, in relation to the international community. I think Sister Corinne mentioned earlier that in relation to refugees, very often local faith communities won't understand the legal context. And I found, for instance, with mosques in Britain, is that they may think that what they're doing might be illegal, or perhaps we shouldn't be helping these people because they may be here illegally. Or so there's a lot of barriers of understanding to have confidence about what they can do and what they can say, because very often it's the faith communities who have to stand up to the right-wing politicians and the opinion makers. And then the sort of sometimes the most natural instinct for faith communities is certainly in the Muslim community is to feed people and to house people and to do this sort of basic protection work. But then you're moving to more complex models of support for refugees is not accessible to them. But also there's a range of barriers in relation to institutions, which are very real concerns around proselytization, around impartiality, lack of compliance. Faith communities, like all organizations, can be factional. So I've picked up a lot of concerns and sort of prejudices within institutional funders and actors is, oh, well, if I help this group, I'll be upsetting the other group, the other church group, or they'll say, well, if I'm going to help this church group, then I need to also help the other church group. So I'm going to upset somebody, whoever I don't. So, and then there's the problem which we have in Islamic Relief often is that religion is often integrated or overlapping with politics. So if you become involved with this group, then you're supporting indirectly or unconsciously a political party. And, you know, it's a minefield. And in the humanitarian community, we've become very risk averse. So we tend to say, oh, I'm not having anything to do with any of this because I can't afford a scandal or I can't afford to do something wrong. So we tend to err on the side of caution. So, I mean, in relation to your other question around opportunities, I think things are changing. And particularly in relation to refugees, the contribution of faith communities to refugees now is becoming much better understood and better recognized, and particularly by institutions like UNHCR and others who've worked with them for many years. I mean, UNHCR always used to partner with us, I remember in the early days, because they said, oh, we love Islamic Relief. They're always the first there. They've got food. You know, we where it takes us months to get resources in place, and we're there, and they know the local community and all of these sort of things. But in relation to things like, even now, evidence is coming out of the importance of faith to the psychosocial support and the mental health of refugees, who very often are of faith, and so the importance of providing access to places of worship and faith advice and all of this is, and communities. I think, briefly, because I don't want to go on too long, but the other important areas around accompaniment and the fact that faith communities provide a very unique approach to refugee integration. They provide a community, whereas other institutions provide institutional help and a service. And there's a huge difference, and refugees need both, really. So I'll finish there, because I've probably gone on too long.
Thank you, Mr. Atallah. Mrs. Maria, I will come to you to ask about, after 1 year of the GRF almost, how you see the role of the faith-based organization developed regarding to commitments, impacts, and enhancing the response to refugee inclusion.
Thank you very much for the question, and thanks for the interesting panel and the conversation that we're having. Maybe as just a starting remark, LWF may not be very familiar to everyone on this panel, and just to say that LWF's origins date to the Second World War, when we were founded precisely to respond to refugee concerns, particularly in Europe at the time, when 1 in 4 refugees were Lutherans. And since then, we've expanded our operations globally to respond to all of the major refugee crises that are ongoing right now. And we've continued, so we have extensive experience of working with refugees in protection-related and primary service delivery in all of the major refugee crises globally. But at the Global Refugee Forum, we made 2 particular pledges, which we've followed up on in this year and these 2 years since the forum. And the first one was particularly to look at working in linking our actual program in the field, our programming in the field, working with refugees, with international advocacy through what we call a local to local approach, and very specifically working through through human rights mechanisms, the universal periodic reviews and the various treaty body monitoring systems, to raise the voices of refugees themselves through the regular monitoring of state implementation of human rights, to make sure that when a country like Uganda reports on its own human rights responsibilities, it also includes the response it provides to refugees, and to make sure that refugee rights are reflected in the country reviews as well. And we've been doing that very specifically this past year, and increasingly so in all of our work that we do with the Human Rights Council of the UN, and have also had quite a lot of success in making sure that refugee rights are included when we're talking about education or health service provision or specific protection issues related to refugees. We've also taken part in the UNHCR multi-faith COVID-19 campaign this past year, to make sure that refugees are also included in the COVID responses of the states concerned, and have had some good success in that in many places. We're also co-chairing the Global Protection Cluster Task Team on Human Rights engagement, where the focus is very much on refugee and IDP inclusion in human rights work. Our second pledge at the Global Refugee Forum was made together with Islamic Relief. where we have been working on the Welcoming the Stranger platform, particularly to work on refugee advocacy programs together and to outreach to other faith actors as well. And I think this event that we're actually doing is part of us implementing our Global Refugee Forum pledge. So we've continued to amplify the voices of religious leaders, faith actors, and refugees themselves as much as possible in the public debates around refugee rights, and to make sure that the people who are concerned themselves actually have a voice on the floor. Thank you.
Thanks. Again, I will thank you very much for your insights. I will go back to Mr. Luciani. There is a lot of question for you from the floor as well. I just would like to ask the second question that we are planned for this panel, which is in the partnership with the faith-based organization, is it increase the reach and the relevant depth of the humanitarian response to forced displacement? And if it's so, what is the reasons for that?
I mean, first of all, I don't know whether I should reply already now to the other question that are in the chat, or there will be another possibility later to speak. But first of all, I will reply to your question. I mean, let's say, I think we are the European Union is, as I said, is very much keen to work with civil society organizations, including faith-based organizations. We believe that your work is has a peculiar quality, because indeed, I mean, there is a determination and the capacity to reach out to the population that you don't easily find also in other civil society organizations. You are faith-based organizations are frequently the first one to respond, those resisting the longest in a situation where others have left. You are still there. You are clearly animated by strong principles and values that produce an endurance. Also, how can I say, particular inclination also to be very attentive to the intimate expectations of the community. So we like very much this capacity also to have this humanistic approach that, of course, we can find this also in other civil society organizations, but faith-based organizations are indeed, I mean, have something more in general. So I can just say that we are in favor whenever, of course, that this is possible. European Union is a big organization with the capacity to intervene at financial level also on a large scale. So sometimes there are also reasons of efficiency that allow, I mean, push us to go towards other solutions that allow a more a bigger or quicker response. I mean, it depends also on logistics. I mean, but in general, I think I can reply like this. I mean, yes, there is, in my view, a plus. Again, it depends also on the situation, on the concrete actors that are available, on also the concrete forms of assistance to be delivered, because not always everything is possible to everyone. I mean, so then I don't know whether I should also pick up some of the questions in the chat, or you will.
No, we will have it after. Thanks a lot. Thanks for your answers. And I think we are in a time where we have to work more about development responses than the humanitarian, because it's taking longer, and we need to have like longer programs and longer approaches, which is include everyone. Like we can say like whole society approach, and the faith-based organization have a big role to do there. Back to Mr. Pitt, and the second question were about the role of the faith-based organization in the GCR implementation, and where do you specifically see the opportunities for them for the GRF follow-up as well?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question, Shaza. We think that one of the biggest merits of the compact is its whole of society approach. In the preparations of the compact, Germany strongly supported the focus on a multi-stakeholder approach in refugee contexts, but also the emphasis on forging new partnerships to enable lasting solutions for refugees. But as also outlined in the compact, the positive impact of faith-based organizations in fostering respect and understanding in the host societies, as well as combating discrimination, cannot be stated enough and cannot be underlined enough. In addition, we think that faith-based organizations are very often the first responders and play a crucial role in refugee integration. And I can tell you that this is also the case very concretely in Germany. One particularly striking example is the role of a German faith-based organization in the start of Germany's private sponsoring program for refugee resettlement in 2019. And it is thanks to the strong lobbying efforts of organizations like Caritas or Diakonie that the program was eventually set up, and this is an important achievement. And we would welcome, to make that very clear, an even stronger engagement of faith-based organizations in implementing the program and making the private sponsoring opportunities a reality. We think that NGOs, and among them faith-based organizations, are a key pillar of German humanitarian assistance. That's why in 2020, we provided almost 300 million euros to non-governmental organizations and other non-governmental actors. So that's a very substantial part of the humanitarian assistance that we are handing out, which is going to non-governmental organizations. But as pointed out before, we think that in the lead up to the high-level officials meeting, we should focus on matching the pledges and bringing the engagement of more partners, including faith-based organizations, together to jointly implement their mutual reinforcing pledges. For us, it's very encouraging to see from the last progress report that the implementation of most of the 45 pledges that were submitted by faith-based organizations is well underway. Many of them have already been fulfilled. So we encourage for faith-based organizations to seek opportunities to match their pledges with other pledging entities, for example, with host country pledges, in order to very concretely improve refugee inclusion. We also encourage faith-based organizations to stay engaged in the co-sponsoring groups and advance solutions for refugee situations in these groups. And as my final remark on these questions, we appreciate that today's discussion will inform the Welcoming the Stranger, Shaping the Future conference. In turn, we would also encourage the organizers that the results of the conference will be fed or made available to the preparations of the next forum, which is going to take place in 2023. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. I think it's a great opportunity also to work all together and to have these opportunities and these programs to prepare for the next meeting for the GRF. I will go back to Atallah and ask the second question, that if there is any good practices or good examples about the faith-based organization perspective on the solutions that they already came up with. So some of the good practices that the faith-based organization can did, or can you share it with us? Sorry, you are unmuted. You need to unmute. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
we did some research with UNHCR in 2018 into their engagement with faith communities, and we faith-based partners, and we came out with a range of case studies which I can share if people are interested. But I was reviewing them actually, and what was interesting was that UNHCR and other institutions were able to pick up on the very obvious strengths and unique strengths that faith communities provided. And there was one example, for instance, of an institution that worked with church organizations in Lebanon in responding to the refugee crisis of people coming from Syria. Host communities started to resent all the aid going to these communities and the ignoring of the host communities. So they partnered with this organization, who then networked and partnered with all the individual churches to identify and enable support to go to people within those communities, because they were people who naturally knew and understood the vulnerable people. They had the best links into the community, and they were able to do that. And similarly, I mentioned earlier the area of mental health and psychosocial support. It was found that actually visits and hosting and inviting refugees into households within those communities brought very practical relief and benefits to the refugees. They were able to feel solidarity with the local community. They were able to feel welcomed. They were able to share prayers and perspectives. And that reminds me also of similar experience in Europe, where I've seen in communities such as Lutheran communities and Catholic communities in Italy, where they have had an approach whereby they ensured that refugees were made to feel welcomed into a community. So they went beyond just handing out secondhand clothes or new clothes and food and shelter, but actually enabling them to join community meetings, and even opened up their church services to Muslims in a way that was very inclusive and unconditional. So when I spoke to some of the Muslims, they said, "Oh, we love coming here. We really feel a connection with these people. We feel we're respected. Our faith is respected, and we love this on." So these are some of the strengths coming out, which are starting to be understood much better and utilized in responses. I mentioned earlier that UNHCR and others recognize that ultimately it's often local communities who are the first responders and who will provide that ongoing ability for refugees to integrate. So working with them makes obvious sense. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Atallah. And last but not least, the question is to you, Maria. What is still need to be done to achieve better engagement? Like if we can speak about the impact on refugees' lives, what is the deeper role or the partnership from your perspective should still be done to improve this situation?
I think one of the key elements that we need to work on is really the inclusion of the refugees themselves in issues that concern them. I think this is really important when we work on human rights issues and trying to raise the basic human rights of refugees. The voices that we bring to the tables to witness to the abuses and to witness to the exclusion need to be the people themselves. This in itself is empowering. I think another issue I want to point to is something that Atallah also spoke about before, which is the engagement models in the humanitarian sector. If I'm listening to you, Mr. Köhler, also, for instance, explaining how the German government is dealing and giving so much contribution to the humanitarian response in so many countries across the world, this is organized as any state party would organize the delivery of aid. And big international NGOs like Islamic Relief or LWF, we're able to engage with that system because we speak the same language. We understand the human rights framework. We know what inputs and outputs are. We know what strategic objectives are, and so on. And that's the language we speak with you. But at the same time, we're also based on religious values or faith values. And we can also speak with the faith communities who don't speak that language. And nonetheless, they deliver that aid at the very, very front lines, and they have so much to give and contribute towards good human response to refugee crises. Those two languages don't easily marry, and we need to find the mechanisms how to enable also then the funding to go where it needs to go and be reported on correctly and used in all of the humanitarian ways which Atala was mentioning, the neutrality, the correct way of delivering humanitarian aid, but enable them to report in a way that is then acceptable also to the state donors. And here we have a huge challenge on how to do this, and there are more funds needed. We need more funds to be able to enable both the actual response, but also the capacity building of the frontline faith communities to comply with what needs to be complied with. And this needs to be long term. If we have 1 year of capacity building for faith actors at the front lines, this will not deliver at the level that we need to deliver at. So I would plead for inclusion of refugees, long-term funding to faith-based actors, and to commitment to long-term collaboration. This will really bring good impact both to the individual humans and to our taxpayers who need to know that their money is going where it needs to go. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marie, for this. And I think this is really a key for all the NGOs and civil society workers, regardless they are faith-based organization or even like refugee-led organization or whatever. I think this is exactly what we need. And I'm really interested in this insights. And now we will open the floor for the questions, and I will try to get some questions from the audience. And we will start with the first question to Mr. Luciani. Suppose that there are really no or not much challenges in the cooperation of EU with a faith-based organization. How would you rate the fact that the EU governments do limit, or at least the work and the impact of NGOs and the faith-based organization worker to rescue a refugee in the Mediterranean? How could opportunities be developed in the constructive way to safeguard the lives of refugees?
So I'm not sure that there will be all the time to reply to all the questions on the right hand side. So
no.
To reply in a short to most of them, and not just to say also because I'm not sure I understood exactly. I mean, there are
no, we cannot. We hope
the coast guards of the member states that are rescuing migrants every day in the Mediterranean, so nobody's preventing anything. On the contrary, we are the member states, the coast guards, including NGOs in some cases, are on the front line in saving and rescuing migrants and refugees in the Mediterranean. So I would like to reassure about this. And the EU is certainly backing and supporting all this. I would say in a nutshell, if I go through many questions, I would like to remind the EU role on asylum. Really in a nutshell, I would like to stress that we intervene at three levels. I'm really summarizing. First of all, the EU supports host countries of refugees all over the world, including the refugees that are hosted there. And we are probably the biggest donors in the world about that, in some cases in a very massive manner. To give an example, the Syrian refugee crisis received a response of more or less 20 billion euros from the EU. And it's not just about humanitarian assistance. I mean, the first response. It's also a development assistance, because these are most of the cases protracted crisis. I mean, since 2016, the EU mobilized around 9 billion euros in this post-crisis assistance. We continuously support social inclusion, sometimes returns, sometimes on better integration into the host community. So this is the first big strand of work we do, and we will continue to do, being true to the Global Compact on Refugees and to the EU Convention to the UN Convention on Refugees.
Thanks.
The second stream is to work within Europe. I mean, let me remind you that we have a very advanced, again, probably the most advanced in the world, asylum system, very open, we receive hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers every year. In 2016, must have been 1,200,000 in 1 year. I mean, of course, due to the pandemic, certain numbers have gone down, but still in 2019, there were more than 600,000 in a year. It's a very open and inclusive and based indeed on the assessment of the individual cases. The third, and of course, all this is funded, also co-funded by the EU and the member states. And the third strand of work, I mean, to reply to one of the questions, is also the resettlement. This is a little bit in between. I mean, to take 12 refugees that are stranded or hosted in another transit country, to bring them to the EU or to another country of destination if needed. This is something also that we are trying to do together with the member states. Of course, it depends very much also on the single member states. So there are member states that are more vocated or less vocated to that. For 2020-21, there is a common pledge of 30,000 resettlements. Of course, this has become extremely more complicated because of the pandemic. The EU supports and co-funds all this. Sorry. And we are trying also, in line with the new EU Pact on Migration and Asylum, to encourage more member states and to do resettlement, and also to use more flexible channels. Resettlement is a very structured modality, but we are trying to encourage to use alternative and easier channels. The humanitarian corridors we have been doing already, I mean, for persons that have not yet gone through all the refugee examination procedures. And also we are now again proposing the sponsorships, for instance. By the way, we have also been helping sometimes resettlement to take place to third countries. For example, with Argentina, I mean, if there are the countries that are ready to take refugees, the EU is also ready to help. I mean, if this can help indeed the refugees. I will stop there because I mean,
yeah, thank you. I would like to hear more, but we are in the short of time. In 1 minute, Mr. Pitt, could you please give us a little bit about after the effects of impact the COVID-19, what is the future planning to make sure that multi-stakeholders approaches is included in the GCR and the bottom-up approach?
Thank you, Shasa. I will try to be very brief. We think that when we look at the COVID-19 pandemic or facing the challenges resulting from this pandemic, the Compact indeed provides a blueprint for an effective and comprehensive response and valuable instruments which we can draw upon. And I would just limit myself to mention a few. The core principles of the GCR, the burden and the responsibility sharing, is needed more than ever. This is very clear in this pandemic. The global challenges posed by the pandemic require international cooperation and solidarity, also one of the principles, with a focus on support to low and middle income refugee host countries who are particularly hit hard by the secondary economic effects of the pandemic. And the Compact calls very strongly for the inclusions of refugees in the national system. That is something that is also very, very important in the context of the pandemic. I think that the past months have clearly shown that the response to a health crisis like this one can only be effective if it reaches everyone. That includes, of course, refugees. Meaning only if that refugees are included in national emergency planning and health system, only then can this be effective. Germany provided additional and flexible humanitarian funding, and we front-loaded our contributions for humanitarian organizations with the means to respond to the COVID pandemic most effectively, measures that also the GCR calls upon. Mm-hmm. And lastly, the restrictions that have been imposed by the pandemic and which only allow international organizations very often limited access during the pandemic have once more shown the importance of a multi-stakeholder approach, and the multi-stakeholder approach that is enshrined in the Compact, because we think that NGOs, especially faith-based organizations and local actors, have played a crucial role in delivering humanitarian assistance, providing safety nets for the most vulnerable and ensuring refugee protection in a very effective way. I will leave it with this, but I also want to highlight and to underline, because I'm very thankful for the remarks that have been made by Maria Immonen, who has stressed the importance of the human rights framework, and also that we listen to refugees and that we take their voices into account. We always try, as Germany's humanitarian assistance, to work concretely with local actors. We have budgetary restraints, or we have not budgetary restraints, but we have restraints by law, which make it difficult. But of course, we always oblige the international NGOs we are working with in order to do capacity building with local NGOs, or very often also provide the funding that we provide them for local NGOs and to work together with them. So indirectly, at least, we are working with local NGOs and trying to support them, including faith-based organizations as well.
Thanks, Mr. Pitt. Unfortunately, I will not be able to ask more questions for the panelists, but I really enjoyed, and I think everyone enjoyed, and a lot of the questions will be raised in the chat. So also we will try to answer these questions post the webinar. I would like to give the floor for Mr. Ilan to doing the closing remarks. And thanks very much for the Highness and the panelists all. Thanks a lot.
Hi, thank you very much, Shaza. To close the meeting of today and join with a few concluding remarks on behalf of the four primary organizers, which are, of course, Islamic Relief Worldwide, Lutheran World Federation, as well as the Quaker Council for European Affairs, as well as HIAS. So my own organization, quite like LWF, started off maybe a bit earlier, not following the Second World War, but in about 140 years ago, in helping support members of our own community, Jews that fled from pogroms at the time from Russia, and later on became a generic refugee aid organization. So today we operate in some 16 countries, and it's a real honor for us to join the other faith-based organization in organizing this event. We all have fairly similar values in common, and I think that's why it's very important for us to come together in an event like this. It's important to know that I will make a few comments in terms of summarizing the discussions, but also some of the insight that may be helpful to take us towards the follow-up conference, Welcoming the Stranger, Shaping the Future. It will be a global conference. Hopefully we'll be able to meet in person at that time. We're talking about March 2022 in Geneva. Talking about Geneva, it was really only just over a year ago when many of us met at the Global Refugee Forum. It was at that time that we also made our pledges. For HIAS, it was focused on economic inclusion of refugees, protect and empower LGBTQ+ persons living in displacement, protect and empower those that are facing gender-based violence, pledge around mental health and psychological support, as well as many other FBOs. We also pledged to increase resettlement and complementary pathways to meet the international protection of those that are most vulnerable among the refugees. So in the year that followed the Global Refugee Forum, of course, all our attention was focused on the current public health crisis, getting out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And hence, I believe today's discussion provides really an opportune moment to focus attention once more on the Global Compact for Refugees and its actual implementation, both in Europe and beyond Europe. So, and I also take note of Mr. Kohler's call for FBOs, both in Europe, but also in hosting countries elsewhere in the world to come together and to match our respective pledges, because it's only so much that each of us individually can do. Also, you know, the very success of the Global Compact, of course, depends on the willingness of the international community to support its implementation. So therefore, it's really important for faith-based organizations and really all of civil society to continuously advocate for implementing the commitments that were made at the time. You know, especially perhaps in the past year when focus was not so much on the accountability of each of us that pledged at that time. I think it's important to refocus and indeed for the discussions that we will have in the Welcoming the Stranger conference in Geneva next year, that also to feed into the discussions at the next Global Refugee Forum. So the Global Compact makes, of course, quite specific reference to the role of faith-based organizations and faith communities at large in its implementation. Yet the precise nature of this role remains relatively vague. And I believe the discussion of today were really meant to help shed some light on the potential role that we can play in this regard, both locally and internationally. And that's also how the two panels were structured, of course. I should know that we're building on this work by previous work done by the joint learning initiatives of faith and local communities, but also the structured multi-faith dialogue that has been happening around refugee protection within the framework of UNHCR dialogues with civil society. So the first panel focused on the role of faith-based organizations in refugee resettlement, alternative pathways, community-based integration in Europe. And we learned how several faith leaders were informed by their religious beliefs in the very interventions that they took on behalf of refugees and asylum seekers. And I really appreciate the honest contributions of the three panelists. I think it depends a little bit from organization to organization, but it appears that sometimes it can be a gap in the translation of the Global Compact and from global rhetoric, global policy to local implementation. So one possible conclusion could relate also that we all as national, international faith-based actors do more to support grassroots initiatives in terms of funding, technical support, and of course advocacy. And especially this last element is important, as these local actors can really make a difference in terms of mainstreaming the Global Compact by employing it as an advocacy tool for protection of refugees also at the local level. Furthermore, it appears that more can be done to promote interfaith work, as well as alliances between the various faith-based organizations and faith leaders. So often at the moment, we are talking about interfaith collaboration around peace building and reconciliation in countries of origin. But we can also think more deeply about how to create welcoming communities here in Europe and facilitating referrals for community integration services. As my colleague Atala quite nicely put it, faith actors provide a community, whereas other institutional stakeholders sometimes provide services. So I think for relatively small faith communities, especially like, for example, the Jewish ones around Europe, it's only natural to partner with other communities, whether they are confessional ones or non-confessional. But really large or small, in the end, we all stand to gain from the symbolic value of several organizations coming together, several religions pooling their voices, as well as actions and resources to protect refugees. There's an added value in terms of the symbolic importance of us working together around these issues. So finally, in relation to the first panel, and also as per the experience of Father Ray in Italy, so states adhering to the Global Compact should really engage faith-based organizations to set up, implement resettlement programs, as well as alternative pathways for admission. And I must admit that we are making a lot of progress in Europe in that context. But similarly, faith actors' contribution to other such forms of welcoming and integrating refugees and asylum seekers can go much further. And faith actors can facilitate this local integration, both by fostering the development of livelihoods through their community networks, but also by using their influence and moral authority they often enjoy in the host society to promote social connections and mutual understanding. And this can also have a considerable impact in addressing xenophobia in our respective societies. So then moving to the second panel, and I know that it's 4 o'clock, so I'll be very quick. So the second panel really reflects on the challenges, perceived or real, and opportunity in partnering with faith-based organizations in the implementation of international aid. And I believe that both Mr. Luciano and Mr. Köhler made very valuable contributions on how to address some of these barriers. And we are grateful to both the Commission and the government of Germany for their willingness to engage in a very open discussion about their own commitments also in relation to the Global Compact. So the discussion reflected, I believe, overall positivity of the potential to influence in terms of the Global Compact. But it has also become quite clear, I believe, that the comprehensive whole society approach that the Global Compact is advocating can only really come to fruition if these real perceived barriers to partnership with faith-based organizations, whether they're on the ground, in the field, or in Europe, are also addressed. And it appears that faith-based organizations sometimes risk being perceived as likely to implement assistance in a discriminatory way, or perhaps linked to religious activities. There's absolutely no doubt that all humanitarian actors, faith-based ones as well as non-faith-based ones, need to commit to the normative principles set by the international community, for example, around impartiality and neutrality. And such a commitment to humanitarian principles is, I believe, entirely consistent with core theological beliefs of all the major religions. And it really should not come at the expense of including local faith leaders and communities in these multi-stakeholder responses to forced migration. Indeed, local faith leaders should be consulted also in the design of such responses. There seems a general recognition that local faith communities have the ability to leverage considerable resources to address mass displacement, where we're thinking about logistical infrastructure, staff, volunteers, financial support, and social capital. And I believe all the speakers in the second panel also recognize this. And finally, as part of a response to forced migration, we should also consider faith itself being sometimes in need of protection. So therefore, humanitarian and development actors need to support different forms of cultural, spiritual, and religious rehabilitation. And as appropriate in the local context, this can also be integrated sometimes in mental health programming. So in conclusion, I believe we can all agree that greater literacy, greater understanding about the intersections of religion with development and humanitarian issues would be positive, and opening the door to deepening partnerships between faith-based organizations on the one hand and the global humanitarian and development system on the other, and in general, really be a positive force to further the implementation of the Global Compact. Kekeli, with this, I would like to turn the floor back to you to close us out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilan. Thank you, speakers. I wanted to thank the participants who joined from all over Europe, but also there were participants from Bangladesh, Kenya, the US, Malaysia, and it really made for a global discussion. It also reminded us of the global influence and impact of European policies and action. And that means that EU member states and institutions must operate at the highest standard possible so that refugee protection, as it's been mentioned, is not about numbers, but in the words of Sister Corinne, it's about freedom and love. We've run out of time. We haven't exhausted the topic, far from it, but it's been mentioned that there will be a Welcoming the Strangers, Shaping the Future international conference next year. And during the course of this year, there will be other regional national events organized by partners and leading all the way to the next global refugee forum. And we will also try to address some of the great questions asked after the webinar. So watch out for further communication from us. And on this, thank you again for a great conversation. Stay safe, and until the next time.